On a frozen morning in February 2007, in the small town of Brookville, Indiana, a young woman named Jessica Marie Hartley vanished from her modest ranch-style home on the edge of town. She was 28 years old, a cashier at the local grocery store, a mother to a 4-year-old daughter named Emma. Her husband, 32-year-old Michael Hartley, a mechanic at the Ford dealership on Route 52, reported her missing at 11:47 that morning. He told deputies his wife had been there when he left for work at 6:30. When he returned home during his lunch break, she was gone. Her car sat in the driveway. Her purse rested on the kitchen counter. The coffee pot was still warm. But Jessica Marie Hartley had disappeared, leaving behind her daughter, her life, and a mystery that would grip this community of 3,500 souls for more than a decade. The question that haunted Brookville was simple, terrible, and remained unanswered for years. Where did Jessica go? And why would a young mother leave her child behind without a word, without a trace, without even her shoes? Brookville sits in the southeastern corner of Indiana, tucked into the rolling hills where the state begins its slow descent toward the Ohio River. It is farm country, with white church steeples visible from every vantage point, where everyone knows everyone, where secrets are currency and gossip travels faster than the wind that sweeps across the cornfields. In February, the landscape turns gray and brown, stripped of color, the bare trees standing like sentinels against skies that seem to press down with the weight of coming snow. The Hartley home sat on Meadowlark Drive, a quiet street that dead-ended at a soybean field, where 5 modest houses faced each other across cracked asphalt, and where children rode bicycles in circles during the summer months. Jessica Marie Thompson had grown up in Brookville, graduated from Franklin County High School in 1997, married Michael Hartley in 2001, in a small ceremony at the Methodist Church on Main Street. Those who knew her described a quiet woman, soft-spoken, with long brown hair she wore pulled back in a ponytail most days. She worked the afternoon shift at Sullivan's Market, scanning groceries and making small talk with customers she had known her entire life. Michael Hartley had grown up 2 towns over in Laurel, had moved to Brookville after high school to work at his uncle's garage before taking the job at the dealership. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a reserved manner that some interpreted as shyness, and others found difficult to read. They had one child together, Emma, born in October 2002, a bright girl with her mother's eyes and her father's serious demeanor. The morning of February 14, 2007, began like any other winter Wednesday in Brookville. The temperature hovered at 23 degrees. A light snow had fallen during the night, leaving a thin white coating on lawns and rooftops that caught the pale morning sun. Jessica woke at 5:30, as she always did on Michael's work days. She made coffee in the Mr. Coffee machine on the counter, the same machine they had received as a wedding gift 6 years earlier. She packed Michael's lunch, a turkey sandwich on wheat bread, an apple, a bag of chips, a thermos of coffee. She wore her bathrobe, pink fleece, with a coffee stain on the left sleeve that had never quite washed out. Emma still slept in her bedroom down the hall. Her door cracked open the way Jessica always left it, so she could hear if her daughter called out in the night. Clear as throat, Michael left for work at 6:30, precisely on schedule. He would later tell investigators that Jessica stood at the front door in her bathrobe and slippers, holding a cup of coffee, waving as he backed his blue Chevy pickup out of the driveway. He said she smiled. He said everything seemed normal. He said he did not notice anything unusual, anything concerning, anything that would suggest this would be the last time he would see his wife standing in their doorway. The drive to the Ford dealership took 12 minutes. He clocked in at 6:43, 3 minutes ahead of his 7 o'clock start time, as the time card records would later confirm. He worked through the morning, rotating tires on a customer's F-150, changing oil on a Taurus, performing a brake inspection on an Expedition. At 11:30, he took his lunch break as he always did and drove home. The house was quiet when he entered through the front door. Too quiet, he would later say. Emma sat on the living room floor in her pajamas, watching cartoons on the television, a bowl of dry cereal beside her. She looked up when her father entered but did not speak. Michael called for Jessica. No answer. He walked through the house, checking each room. The bedroom was empty, the bed unmade. The bathroom was empty, Jessica's toothbrush still wet in the holder. The kitchen was empty, the coffee pot still on, the carafe half full, the burner keeping it warm. Her purse sat on the counter where she always left it. Her keys were in the ceramic bowl by the front door. Her winter coat hung on the hook in the hallway. Her car, a silver Honda Accord, sat in the driveway exactly where it had been that morning. Michael searched the house again, opening closets, checking the basement, looking in places where logic suggested his wife could not possibly be, but checking anyway, because panic makes us thorough in irrational ways. He went outside, walked around the house, looked in the detached garage where they stored lawn equipment and Christmas decorations and boxes of belongings they had never unpacked from previous moves. He called her cell phone. It rang inside the house in her purse on the counter, unanswered. He called her mother. Jessica had not been there. He called her sister in Cincinnati. She had not heard from Jessica in 3 days. At 11:47, Michael Hartley dialed 911 and reported his wife missing. The first deputy arrived at 11:59. Deputy Thomas Crawford, a 15-year veteran of the Franklin County Sheriff's Department, pulled his cruiser into the driveway and approached the house where Michael stood on the front porch, arms crossed against the cold. Crawford would later write in his report that Michael appeared calm, almost eerily composed for a man whose wife had just vanished. He spoke in measured tones, answering questions with precise details, showing the deputy through the house, pointing out Jessica's belongings, her car, the evidence of her presence, and her impossible absence. Deputy Crawford noted the coffee pot, still warm. He noted the daughter, still watching television, still silent. He noted that Jessica's shoes were lined up by the front door, her winter boots, her everyday sneakers, her church flats. If she had left, she had done so barefoot in February snow. By 1 o'clock that afternoon, 4 additional deputies had arrived. They began a systematic search of the property, walking through the soybean field behind the house, checking the drainage ditch that ran along Meadowlark Drive, looking in outbuildings and sheds on neighboring properties. Sheriff Daniel Morrison arrived at 1:30 and took command of the scene. He was a stocky man in his mid-50s, with 30 years of law enforcement experience, most of it in Franklin County, where serious crimes were rare, and missing persons cases usually resolved within hours when someone turned up at a friend's house or a shopping trip ran long. But Jessica's car was in the driveway. Her purse was on the counter. Her daughter was home alone. This was different. The community response was immediate and overwhelming. By 3 o'clock, volunteers had begun gathering at the Brookville Volunteer Fire Department, organizing search parties, printing flyers with Jessica's photograph. The image they used came from the previous Christmas, Jessica smiling at the camera, wearing a red sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. The flyers listed her height, 5 feet 4 inches, her weight, 120 pounds, her eye color, brown, her distinguishing features. A small scar on her left hand from a childhood accident. They distributed 300 flyers throughout Brookville and the surrounding towns that first day. By evening, Jessica's face stared out from telephone poles and storefront windows and community bulletin boards across Franklin County. The search expanded throughout the afternoon and into the evening. Volunteers walked shoulder to shoulder through the fields surrounding Meadowlark Drive, calling Jessica's name, looking for any sign of disturbance, any evidence of where she might have gone. The Indiana State Police sent 2 K9 units. The dogs tracked Jessica's scent from the front door of her house to the end of the driveway, then lost it completely, as if she had simply evaporated into the cold February air. Helicopters from the State Police Aviation Unit flew grid patterns over Franklin County, using thermal imaging cameras to search for any heat signature that might indicate a person lying injured or lost in the winter landscape. They found nothing. Those who knew the Hartley family spoke to reporters who had begun arriving from Indianapolis and Cincinnati. Neighbors described them as quiet, private, keeping to themselves but never unfriendly. Jessica's co-workers at Sullivan's Market said she had worked her shift the previous day, Tuesday, from 2 in the afternoon until 10 at night, and had seemed perfectly normal. She had talked about Valentine's Day, mentioned that she and Michael never made a big fuss about it, but that she planned to make his favorite dinner, pot roast with potatoes and carrots. She had clocked out at 10:02 and driven home. Nothing unusual, nothing concerning, nothing that suggested that within 14 hours she would be gone. Michael Hartley sat for his first formal interview with investigators at 6:30 that evening, in the living room of his home, while volunteers continued searching outside, and his daughter stayed with Jessica's mother. Sheriff Morrison and Detective Linda Walsh, a criminal investigator with the state police assigned to assist with the case, asked Michael to walk through the morning again, step by step, minute by minute. He repeated the same story he had told Deputy Crawford. He had woken at 5:30. Jessica was already up making coffee. They had talked briefly about his work schedule, about plans for the weekend, about nothing important. Emma had still been asleep. He had left at 6:30. Jessica had been at the door, waving. Everything normal, everything routine, everything unremarkable until it became the last normal moment of their lives together. Detective Walsh asked about their marriage. Michael said it was fine. She asked if they had been arguing. He said no. She asked about Jessica's state of mind, whether she had seemed depressed or anxious. He said she seemed the same as always. She asked if Jessica had any reason to leave, any problems she had mentioned, any concerns about their life together. Michael shook his head. He said Jessica loved their daughter, loved their home, had no reason to walk away from her life. Detective Walsh made notes, her pen scratching across the pages of her notepad, recording Michael's answers, his tone, his body language. In her notes, she wrote one observation that would later seem significant. Subject maintained steady eye contact. Answers are consistent but almost rehearsed. Shows little emotional affect. No tears. Hands remained still. The search continued through the night. Volunteers rotated in shifts, some going home to rest, others arriving to take their places. Floodlights illuminated the field behind the Hartley house, casting long shadows across the frozen ground. The temperature dropped to 15 degrees. The thin coating of snow from the morning had been trampled and mudded by hundreds of boots. The pristine white now churned into brown slush. By midnight, Sheriff Morrison made the difficult decision to suspend active searching until daylight, when visibility would improve and volunteers would be less at risk of injury in the darkness and cold. But the case remained active. Deputies continued interviewing neighbors, reviewing security footage from businesses along the routes Jessica might have traveled, checking hospitals and shelters, and anywhere a missing woman might appear. The second day of searching brought more volunteers, more media coverage, more questions than answers. The story had spread beyond Franklin County. Television news crews from Indianapolis set up along Meadowlark Drive, filming stand-ups with the Hartley house visible in the background. Jessica's photograph appeared on the morning news broadcasts, her smiling Christmas picture now familiar to viewers across Indiana. The anchor read the details in somber tones. 28 years old, mother of one, vanished from her home without a trace. Tips began coming in to the sheriff's department. Someone claimed to have seen a woman, matching Jessica's description, at a gas station in Batesville. Another caller reported seeing someone who looked like Jessica getting into a car at a rest stop on Interstate 74. Deputies investigated each lead. None panned out. On the third day, Friday, February 16th, investigators executed a search warrant at the Hartley home. Michael had consented to the search, had offered to let them examine anything they wanted, but Detective Walsh insisted on obtaining a warrant, following proper procedure, ensuring that any evidence they found would be admissible if the case ever went to trial. Teams of evidence technicians moved through the house systematically, photographing every room, collecting potential evidence, looking for any sign of violence, any indication that something terrible had happened within those walls. They found nothing, no blood, no signs of struggle, no evidence that Jessica had been harmed in her own home. Her clothes remained in the closet. Her toiletries sat undisturbed in the bathroom. The only thing missing was Jessica herself. Deputies whispered quietly among themselves about details that did not quite fit together. The coffee pot troubled them. Jessica had made coffee at 5:30 before Michael left for work. He had left at 6:30. The pot was still warm when he returned at 11:30, 5 hours later. The warming plate on a standard coffee maker keeps coffee hot for approximately 2 hours before the automatic shutoff engages, a safety feature designed to prevent fires. But this coffee pot was still warm 5 hours later, which meant someone had turned it off and then back on, or had made fresh coffee sometime after Michael left. But if Jessica had made fresh coffee, where was she when it finished brewing? And if she had not made fresh coffee, who had? Clear's throat. The timeline troubled them as well. Michael said he had left home at 6:30 and arrived at work at 6:43, clocking in at that time, confirmed by the dealership's electronic timekeeping system. The distance from Meadowlark Drive to the Ford dealership measured 8.3 miles. Deputies drove the route multiple times at various speeds, obeying all traffic laws, making all stops. The drive took between 11 and 14 minutes depending on traffic light timing. Michael's timeline fit, but the timing of Jessica's disappearance created a narrow window. If she had been there when Michael left at 6:30, and if she had vanished before he returned at 11:30, then something had happened during those 5 hours. But what? And why had Emma, only 4 years old, been left alone, presumably for hours, without her mother? Investigators interviewed Emma on Saturday, February 17th, 4 days after her mother's disappearance. The interview took place at the Child Advocacy Center in Batesville, conducted by a specialist trained in interviewing young children, with Detective Walsh observing through a one-way mirror. Emma sat in a child-sized chair, holding a stuffed rabbit, her legs swinging nervously. The interviewer asked gentle questions. "Do you remember the day Mommy went away?" Emma nodded. "What do you remember?" Emma said she woke up and Mommy was not there. She had gotten out of bed and looked for Mommy but could not find her. She had poured herself cereal and watched cartoons until Daddy came home. The interviewer asked if Emma had seen anything unusual that morning. Emma shook her head. Did she hear anything? Another shake. Did anyone come to the house? Emma paused, then shook her head again, but something in that pause made Detective Walsh lean forward, studying the child's face through the glass. The media coverage intensified as the days passed without resolution. National news outlets picked up the story. Jessica Hartley's disappearance became a cable news talking point, discussed by experts and armchair detectives who debated theories and examined every detail of the case with the benefit of distance and the luxury of speculation. Some suggested Jessica had left voluntarily, fleeing an unhappy marriage, starting a new life somewhere far from Brookville. Others proposed darker scenarios, theories involving foul play, violence, calculated deception. Michael Hartley became a focal point of public scrutiny. He appeared at press conferences, standing beside Sheriff Morrison, appealing for information about his missing wife. He spoke in the same measured tones he had used from the beginning, thanking the volunteers, asking anyone with information to come forward. But his composure troubled some viewers. They expected tears, desperation, emotional pleas. Instead, they saw a man who seemed almost detached, reading from prepared statements, showing little visible distress. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have felt that cold whisper of suspicion in the back of your mind, despite all your efforts to dismiss it, you might understand the growing unease that settled over the investigation. Small things accumulated: the coffee pot, the timeline, the way Michael never seemed to panic, never seemed to fall apart the way people expected grieving spouses to fall apart. Detective Walsh and Sheriff Morrison interviewed Michael 3 more times in the first 2 weeks of the investigation. Each time, his story remained consistent. Each time, his demeanor remained calm. Each time, he offered the same details in the same order with the same measured tone. Consistency can be a sign of truthfulness. It can also be a sign of rehearsal. The investigation revealed other details. Michael and Jessica's marriage had not been as stable as Michael initially suggested. Interviews with Jessica's family and friends painted a picture of increasing tension in the months before her disappearance. Jessica had confided to her sister that Michael had become controlling, questioning where she went, checking the odometer on her car, calling her repeatedly during her shifts at the grocery store. She had mentioned that he accused her of being unfaithful, despite her insistence that she had never been involved with anyone else. Her sister told investigators that Jessica had talked about leaving, about taking Emma and moving back in with their mother, but that she worried about Michael's reaction, feared what he might do if she tried to end the marriage. Investigators examined Michael's alibi more closely. The time card showed he had clocked in at 6:43, but the dealership security cameras revealed something interesting. The footage showed Michael arriving in his truck at 6:38, parking in his usual spot, but not entering the building until 6:42. 4 minutes, not a long time. Barely worth noting under normal circumstances, but it meant he had sat in his truck for 4 minutes before going inside to clock in. Deputies asked him about it. He said he had been finishing his coffee, listening to the end of a song on the radio. Nothing significant, a reasonable explanation. But it added another small detail to the growing list of things that did not quite align perfectly. The search for Jessica Hartley continued throughout March and into April. Volunteer efforts gradually diminished as days turned to weeks with no new leads. The media moved on to other stories, other tragedies, other mysteries. Sheriff Morrison assigned Detective Walsh to continue working the case, but with no body, no crime scene, no concrete evidence of foul play, the investigation stalled. Jessica Hartley had simply vanished, leaving behind questions that had no answers and suspicions that could not be proven. Michael returned to work at the dealership. Emma returned to daycare. Life in Brookville slowly returned to its normal rhythms, though Jessica's missing person flyers remained taped to windows and telephone poles throughout the town, her face fading in the sun and rain. A ghost haunting the community that had known her all her life. By summer of 2007, the case had gone cold. The Franklin County Sheriff's Department maintained an open file. Detective Walsh reviewed it periodically, looking for something she might have missed, some detail that might crack the case open. But without new evidence, without a break, without the one piece of information that could transform suspicion into certainty, there was nothing to do but wait. Wait for someone to come forward. Wait for a body to be found. Wait for the truth to emerge from wherever it had been hiding since that February morning, when Jessica Hartley had simply ceased to exist. The years passed with the slow, grinding weight that only unresolved tragedy can impose. Michael Hartley sold the house on Meadowlark Drive in the fall of 2008, moving with Emma to a small apartment in Laurel, closer to his family, away from the whispers and stares that followed him through Brookville. He changed jobs, leaving the Ford dealership for a position at a tool and die company in the next county, starting over in a place where people did not automatically associate his name with his missing wife. Emma started kindergarten, then first grade, then second grade, growing up without her mother, carrying questions she was too young to articulate but old enough to feel. Those who worked the case never forgot Jessica Hartley. Detective Walsh kept the file on her desk, reviewing it on the anniversary of Jessica's disappearance each year, February 14th. A date that would forever be stained with something darker than Valentine's Day sentiment. She had been promoted to sergeant by 2010, taking on supervisory responsibilities, but she made sure the Jessica Hartley case was never officially closed, never relegated to the archives, never forgotten. Every few months, she would drive past the old house on Meadowlark Drive, now occupied by a different family with different lives. And she would think about the young mother who had vanished from those rooms, wondered where Jessica had gone, whether she had suffered, whether justice would ever catch up to the truth. Clear's throat. Michael remarried in 2011, a woman named Carrie who worked as a receptionist at the tool and die company. A quiet woman who accepted Emma as her own and did not ask too many questions about what had happened to the girl's mother. They had a son together in 2012, giving Emma a half-brother, creating a new family unit that looked, from the outside, remarkably ordinary. But those who have ever lived with unspoken truth understand that normalcy can be a performance, that ordinary lives can hide extraordinary secrets, that the weight of what is not said can crush you slowly over years. Emma Hartley carried that weight in ways that manifested in small, troubling behaviors. Her teachers noticed she drew the same picture repeatedly in art class: a house with a woman standing in the doorway, a truck driving away, a small girl watching from a window. The school counselor noted in her file that Emma seemed withdrawn, struggled to form close friendships, exhibited anxiety when separated from her father or stepmother. Michael attributed it to the trauma of losing her mother at such a young age. The counselor suggested therapy. Michael declined, saying Emma was fine. She just needed time. She just needed to focus on moving forward rather than dwelling on the past. But the past has a way of refusing to stay buried. For those who have ever tried to outrun a truth too terrible to speak aloud, you know that it follows you, patient and relentless, waiting for the moment when defenses weaken and walls crumble, and the weight becomes too much to carry alone. That moment came for Emma Hartley in the spring of 2017, when she was 14 years old, a freshman in high school. A girl who barely remembered her mother's face, except in photographs, but who carried the memory of that February morning like a scar she could not see, but always felt. The trigger was mundane, almost laughably simple. Emma's 9th grade health class began a unit on domestic violence, educating students about warning signs, about cycles of abuse, about resources available to those who needed help. The teacher showed videos of survivors sharing their stories. Emma sat at her desk, listening to a woman describe living with fear, describe hiding the truth, describe protecting a parent she loved despite knowing something was wrong. And something inside Emma broke, or perhaps finally broke free after years of being locked away. She went to the school counselor the next day, April 27, 2017, during her lunch period. She sat in the chair across from Mrs. Richardson's desk and spoke words that had been waiting 10 years to be said. She said she remembered the morning her mother disappeared. She said she remembered waking up early, before the sun came up, hearing sounds downstairs, her father's voice, angry. She said she remembered creeping to the top of the stairs, looking down into the living room, seeing her father standing over her mother, who lay on the floor not moving. She said she remembered being frightened, crawling back to her bed, hiding under the covers, hearing her father's footsteps coming up the stairs, pausing outside her door, then moving on. She said she remembered pretending to be asleep when he looked in on her hours later. She said she remembered him telling her that mommy had gone away but would be back soon. She said she remembered knowing, even at 4 years old, that mommy would not be coming back, that something terrible had happened, that daddy had done something he should not have done. Mrs. Richardson listened, taking notes, maintaining her professional composure even as her hands trembled slightly. She knew the protocols. She knew the procedures. She knew that what Emma had just revealed could not stay within the walls of the guidance office. She contacted the Department of Child Services. They contacted the Franklin County Sheriff's Department. They contacted Detective Linda Walsh, now a lieutenant who had waited 10 years for this exact moment, for the break that would finally bring Jessica Hartley home. The case reopened officially on April 28, 2017. Lieutenant Walsh sat across from Emma in an interview room at the Child Advocacy Center, the same facility where they had interviewed her 10 years earlier, when she had been too young or too traumatized or too frightened to speak the truth. Now she spoke clearly, her voice steady despite the tears that ran down her face. She described what she remembered from that morning, her father and mother arguing, her father's voice getting louder, a crashing sound like something being thrown or someone falling, silence, terrible and complete, then her father coming upstairs, looking in on her, leaving again. Hours of silence before he returned and pretended to find the house empty. Lieutenant Walsh asked if Emma was certain about what she remembered. Emma nodded. She said she had always remembered but had been too afraid to tell anyone, afraid of what would happen to her father, afraid that no one would believe her, afraid that speaking the truth would destroy what remained of her family. But she could not carry it anymore. The weight had become unbearable. The truth demanded to be spoken, finally, after a decade of silence. The investigation moved swiftly. Lieutenant Walsh obtained warrants to search Michael Hartley's current residence in Laurel. On May 2, 2017, a team of investigators descended on the modest 2-story house where Michael lived with his wife and son. They executed the search while Michael was at work, removing boxes of documents, family photographs, computers, anything that might contain evidence related to Jessica's disappearance. They interviewed Carrie, who seemed genuinely shocked, insisting that Michael had never given her any reason to suspect he had been involved in his first wife's disappearance. She said he rarely talked about Jessica, said only that she had left and never returned, that the police had never found her. Investigators also returned to the house on Meadowlark Drive, now occupied by the Martinez family, who had purchased it in 2008. Knowing its history, but accepting the good price that came with a house where tragedy had occurred. They searched the basement, using ground-penetrating radar, looking for any sign of disturbed earth, any indication that something had been buried there. They found nothing. They searched the garage, the crawl space, the attic. Nothing. If Jessica's body had been hidden in that house, it was not there anymore. But technology had advanced considerably in the 10 years since Jessica's disappearance. Investigators obtained Michael's cell phone records from February 2007, records they had reviewed before but now examined with new urgency and new questions. The records showed that Michael's phone had pinged off a tower near Brookville at 6:28 on the morning of February 14th, consistent with his stated departure time. But his phone had also pinged off the same tower at 7:03, 33 minutes after he claimed to have already been at work. The dealership was 20 minutes away in the opposite direction. There was no legitimate reason for his phone to ping off that tower at 7:03 if he had been at work since 6:43. Confronted with this evidence, Michael's attorney advised him to refuse further interviews, but the investigation continued without his cooperation. Investigators mapped the cell tower coverage, traced possible routes, calculated drive times. They developed a theory. Michael had left home at 6:30 as he claimed, but he had not driven directly to work. He had driven somewhere else first, somewhere within range of that Brookville tower, somewhere it would take approximately 30 minutes to reach and return from before arriving at the dealership. They plotted circles on maps, identified possible locations, cross-referenced them with reports from the original investigation. One location stood out. The old Garrison Quarry, abandoned since the late 1990s, sat 3 miles outside Brookville, down a gravel access road that few people used anymore. The quarry had filled with water over the years, creating a deep lake surrounded by limestone walls, dark and cold and isolated. Divers from the Indiana State Police Underwater Search and Rescue Team descended into the quarry on May 15, 2017. The water was murky, visibility minimal, the depth exceeding 100 feet in places. They searched for 3 days, using sonar to map the bottom, sending divers down to investigate anomalies, looking for what everyone feared they would find. On May 18, 2017, the divers discovered a vehicle resting on the quarry floor, 93 feet below the surface, a silver Honda Accord. License plate matching the registration for Jessica Marie Hartley. The car had been weighed down with concrete blocks tied to the frame, an attempt to ensure it would sink and stay hidden. But time and shifting sediment had moved those blocks, and the car had tilted, settling at an angle that made it visible on sonar. Inside the vehicle, still strapped into the driver's seat, was the body of Jessica Marie Hartley, her remains preserved by the cold water, identifiable through dental records. Finally found after 10 years and 3 months. The arrest came swiftly. On May 20th, 2017, Michael Hartley was taken into custody at his workplace, led out in handcuffs in front of his coworkers, charged with murder in the death of his wife. He did not resist. He did not speak. He maintained the same composure he had shown throughout the investigation, that strange detachment that had troubled investigators from the very beginning. His attorney issued a statement proclaiming his innocence, promising a vigorous defense, insisting that the evidence was circumstantial at best. The trial began in March 2018, more than 11 years after Jessica Hartley's death. The Franklin County Courthouse, a stately building with columns and high ceilings, became the center of intense media attention. Reporters from across the state filled the courtroom. Jessica's family sat in the front row, her mother now gray-haired and weathered, her sister clutching tissues, her father staring at Michael video with an expression that conveyed a decade of grief and rage. Michael sat at the defense table in a suit and tie, his hands folded, his face neutral, showing nothing. The prosecution built its case methodically. They presented the cell phone records, demonstrating that Michael's phone had been near Brookville at 7:03 on the morning Jessica disappeared, contradicting his claim that he had been at work. They presented the timeline, showing that he had time to drive to the quarry, dispose of Jessica's car with her body inside, and still arrive at the dealership by 6:43. They presented the marriage counseling records, which Michael had never mentioned, showing that he and Jessica had been in therapy the previous fall. That Jessica had expressed fear of Michael's temper, that she had discussed leaving him. They presented testimony from Jessica's coworkers, who described bruises they had seen on her arms, bruises she had explained away as clumsiness, but which they now believed told a different story. And they presented Emma. She took the stand on the 5th day of the trial, now 15 years old, her voice barely above a whisper as she recounted what she remembered from that February morning. She described hearing her parents fighting. She described the sounds of violence. She described seeing her father standing over her mother's unmoving form. The defense attorney cross-examined her aggressively, suggesting her memories were false, implanted by suggestions from investigators, distorted by time and trauma. Emma held firm. She said, "I know what I saw. I have always known. I was just too scared to tell anyone until I could not stay quiet anymore." The forensic evidence from the car proved crucial. Despite being submerged for over 10 years, investigators had recovered trace evidence from the vehicle. They found fibers on the driver's seat that matched the bathrobe Jessica had been wearing the morning she disappeared, the pink fleece robe with the coffee stain. They found hair that matched Michael's DNA on the passenger seat and steering wheel. They found scratches on the inside of the trunk consistent with items being placed inside, items that investigators believed were the concrete blocks used to weigh down the vehicle. The defense argued that all of this was circumstantial, that it proved nothing definitive, that Michael's DNA in his wife's car was meaningless since he had driven it many times. But the prosecution had one more piece of evidence. During the search of Michael's home in 2017, investigators had seized his computer. Forensic analysis revealed that Michael had conducted internet searches in the weeks before Jessica's disappearance. On January 23, 2007, he had searched for "How deep is Garrison Quarry?" On January 29th, he had searched for "How long does it take a body to decompose underwater?" On February 7th, 1 week before Jessica vanished, he had searched for missing person investigation procedures. The defense could offer no innocent explanation for these searches. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They returned with a verdict of guilty on 1 count of murder in the first degree. Michael Hartley showed no reaction as the verdict was read, maintaining that same eerie composure that had characterized his demeanor throughout the entire ordeal. Jessica's mother collapsed into her daughter's arms, sobbing, releasing a decade of grief in the moment justice was finally rendered. Michael was sentenced to 60 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge, in delivering the sentence, spoke directly to Michael. She said, "You took a young mother from her daughter, from her family, from a community that loved her. You hid her body in a dark, cold place and let her family suffer for more than a decade, not knowing what had happened to her, holding out hope that she might still be alive. You showed no remorse, no compassion, no humanity. This sentence reflects the gravity of your crime and the depth of the suffering you caused." Michael Hartley was led from the courtroom in shackles. He has maintained his innocence, filing appeals that have been consistently denied. He resides in the Indiana State Prison, where he will likely spend the rest of his life. Emma, now in her early 20s, has rebuilt her relationship with her mother's family. She visits Jessica's grave regularly, a simple headstone in the Brookville cemetery that reads Jessica Marie Hartley, beloved mother and daughter, 1979-2007. Finally home, she speaks publicly about her experience, about the importance of speaking truth even when it is terrifying, about the weight that silence carries, about the freedom that comes from finally letting go of secrets that poison everything they touch. The case of Jessica Marie Hartley represents both the worst and best of human nature. The worst in the violence that ended a young woman's life, in the calculated deception that followed, in the years of suffering imposed on those who loved her. The best in the community that never stopped searching, in the investigators who never closed the file, in the daughter who found the courage to speak truth despite the cost.